face it, you are awesome on guitar and you want to share your gifts with the world, so you've decided to record at home. You've dropped thousands of dollars on recording gear and spent every single waking moment dedicated to honing your craft, all in the hope of achieving your dream of a full-time career recording music for a living. There's only one problem.
And with our stars that we bear by the devil.
Despite your best efforts, your mixes aren't exactly translating into the real world. How many of you out there have worked your asses off on a mix, and I do mean you put everything you had into it, polished it to perfection, only to bring it out of your studio, play it on a friend's stereo, and have it sound like complete ass?
Admit it, Randy. You think it sounds like crap too.
It doesn't sound like crap at all.
Yeah, been there, done that. Well, don't worry. Even if you do get better, it doesn't matter how hard you work on a mix or how good it sounds, because there's always going to be some anonymous dickhead in your public comments insisting your mix sucks and they can do a much better job than you can. Just don't go looking for anything that they've posted, because that never happens. The lesson here is that you suck, give up, don't even try. Because the one thing some people really can't stand is seeing someone else having any kind of success. Now, if you are stubborn enough to ignore all the helpful advice out there telling you being a crime scene cleaner is probably a more rewarding career, here's a few tips that will hopefully make the job a little less agonizing and hopefully help you make some better mixes along the way. Number one, the guitar is not the focus. No, really. Chances are you're a guitar player. It's a popular instrument, and it seems the majority of home recording types in the metal genre anyway are guitar players. The only problem with that is that guitar players tend to forget that there are other instruments in a mix besides the guitar. Now, this comes up time and again on my mix review show, where the guitars are about 4 dBs louder than they should be, and we're struggling to hear anything because it's buried under the sonic onslaught of the Megalomaniac on the 6th string. Guitar players, yes, we get it. You are awesome. You can play it really well, and we're all super impressed by that. Mayhaps if you get your rampaging ego under control and realize you're not the all-important center of the universe, you could turn down your guitars just a tiny bit and realize that, yes, there are other instruments in the band, and your mix might turn out better if we can hear them as well. I know it's a radical idea, but it is worth exploring. For the rest of us out there, yeah, don't hold your breath. Number two, too much EQ on everything. Now, this is a big error so many of us make. We're using EQ to fix problems that should have never happened to begin with. Most of us are using cardioid microphones for recording, meaning they're directional. And one of the trade-offs is the closer a mic gets to a source, the more the low frequencies build up. A proximity effect is something really easy to explain. Simply put, it has to do with the proximity of the source, in this case my mouth, to the capsule of the microphone. As I pull back here, you'll notice the bass goes away. I go back in and we've got a lot more bass. That's all there is to it. Now, studios used to have a variety of mics that used more than one polar pattern. For example, an omnidirectional mic does not suffer from proximity effect the same way a cardioid. And the problem with using multiple cardioid mics is that low frequency buildup happens over multiple tracks, leading to a muddy sounding mix. So what do? Back the mics off a bit? Change the capsule? Of course not. We reach for an EQ. Usually with the track solo. Let me show you guys what I hear is a typical problem, especially with a lot of drum mixes, especially a lot of real drum mixes I keep hearing come up on the mix review show over and over and over again, is that you get really thin toms. And that's mostly because most guys want to EQ their drums with the tracks soloed. The line of thinking is, well, there's not enough air on the drums, so I'm going to add some treble, and that's going to give me the attack I'm looking for. The only problem is, when you add EQ like that, you want to turn them down a little bit so they don't jump out of the mix so much. So you just wind up with really super bright drums when what you should be doing is this. In this case, I'm going to turn off all the individual EQs on the toms here. That's a great EQ by AIX, by the way. But what I'm going to do here is I've got these set up on a global EQ on the Neve here, and I'm just going to apply EQ with the mix running. Got my mids here, top end here. And that's really all you got to do. Again, guys, the real trick here is to EQ with the mix going. You'll get way better results than listening to something soloed up, EQ, and then pop it back in the mix and hope you got it right. Again, we see the same thing happening time and time again on the snare drum, where guys will just add so much EQ because they're hearing the top mic only. And then they're adding treble EQ to that to get more air on the snare. So we're adding more and more treble, and we wind up popping it back into the mix, and it'll wind up sounding kind of thin. Oof. Now, if you want a little more in-depth video on how to get great snare sounds like this, I've got a video coming out real soon called Why Your Snare Sounds Like Shit in a Mix, and I think you guys are really going to like it. It's very in-depth and goes into showing you guys some cool techniques how to do it. But a big one, of course, is let the music play. Let the mix play. Make your EQ adjustments based on what you're hearing to the instrument in the context of a mix. Don't EQ when you're soloed up. You're just going to run it into problems. Number 3, mixing on headphones. Okay, I've complained about this numerous times as it's become fairly easy to spot a mix that was done on a set of regular headphones. Usually they're unbalanced in a way that's very unpleasant, either too much treble or too much bass, or maybe even both. Traditional headphones just plain don't work for mixing. Notice I said traditional. However, Sennheiser might just have the solution. These are the new HT490s. I've had them for the last few days, and after doing some mixing on them, I gotta say, I don't entirely hate the idea, mainly because of one critical thing, the Dear VR software. Dear VR will simulate several acoustic environments, including studio control rooms, most likely that have better acoustic treatment than you have. So I pulled up a mix I'm working on, and the 490s here are allowing me to hear things maybe just slightly differently than I would normally hear with my monitors, and that's super cool. But the Dear VR system I've got here, this is really neat too, because it allows me to change my mix room perspective. Now, if you're listening on monitors, this might not sound all that great, because what you're hearing is the sound being tweaked for the 490s here. If you have headphones on, you might hear something a little cool. It might not. I'm going to leave it off here for a second, and then I'm going to kick it in, and I'll show you the different perspectives we get. This is pretty neat. That's my straight up monitor mix. That's what I'm used to hearing in the room, and it sounds pretty cool, but I'm just not liking that on the headphones. It's when I kick this in. This is where it gets really cool. That might sound bad to the rest of you guys, but that's pretty cool. For me, anyway. The all-important car mix. Club. Home theater. Ooh, stadium. Back to mix room. And turn it off. That's pretty damn cool. If that's getting me the translation I think it's going to get, maybe mixing on headphones won't be such a bad idea after all. Now, if you don't have access to a treated room, or you're living in an apartment, or if you're traveling, headphones can make a lot of sense. Now, I put together this ultimate travel mixing rig using my MacBook Air, the Neumann MT48 interface, and the HT490s. And wow, what a sound. I just sat down, hooked everything up and made sure everything was gonna work. And wow, I gotta say, I'm super impressed by all of this. This is just great. So I've got my MacBook Air, which is super light. Gotta thank Henning Polly for recommending that to me a couple of years ago. I was doing a lot of travel and I asked Henning, what do I get? Do I get a MacBook Pro? He's like, no, get the MacBook Air. It's heavy duty enough to handle everything you're gonna need, and it doesn't weigh anything, and the battery lasts forever. I'm like, good idea. I really like that, yeah. Now, Henning, despite his insane aesthetic, is actually a very intelligent person, and he's given me some wonderful advice over the years, and if you haven't checked out his show, I highly recommend you do. He means well, and he's got fantastic advice, so just keep that in mind. But I'm monitoring through this. This is the Neumann MT48, and I did a piece on this last year. This thing is just next level. Apparently, it's really popular with the audiophile crowd just for the headphone monitor. I gotta say, yeah, it's clean as hell. And here's the crazy thing. So I've got this going here, and this is just like a very much a raw mix, not touched, just some tracks in place. And I really hate the sound of it, and that is until I kick in the Deer VR. And you know, obviously, you're gonna need the headphones to really hear the effect. You can hear the effect going on right now in playback, but believe me, I'm getting a very different story here. I don't hate that. You know, it's actually somewhat pleasant, and I can change the different room perspectives. And this isn't bad at all. I got a little volume control here. I can crank up these headphones if I want. I actually feel like I could sit here, mix a song on this, and get some real work done and not be wondering, oh man, what would it sound like on monitors? I think this will actually translate. Number 4. You didn't take breaks. Now, one habit I got into during my auto worker days was to take a short nap after a long day of sleep-deprived manual labor. It's kind of like hitting the reset button. Now, thanks to you guys, I get to do YouTube full time, but I still take a short nap every single afternoon. I'll come out here to the studio at 8 a.m. every day and work till about 3 or 4 p.m. I'll head in, read for a bit, take a nap for about half an hour, get up, make dinner, and then head back out here to the studio. The amazing thing is just how many mixing issues seem to solve themselves during that downtime. If you're dealing with something and just can't seem to get it working in a mix, the hardest thing to do is walk away. And sometimes that's the one thing you need to do more than anything else, because taking a break for an hour or two can give your mind a chance to deal with other things instead of the problems we've been trying to solve. And when you can focus on other things, then you can approach the issue later with a fresh perspective. And more often than not, you'll find the solution will present itself to you. Number 5, nobody cares about your 12-minute gent epic. Now, I absolutely love doing my mix review show, but I swear some days it seems like a contest to see who can bore the entire audience the most. Now, in the early days of rock and roll, there were format limits. 45 RPM discs would only play 5 minutes, and radio singles in the 60s averaged about 2.5 minutes. If you wanted airplay, you had to trim down your song and get to the point. These days, with digital distribution, those limits have been removed and the musicians are free to explore their own creativity without such archaic limits like a vinyl disc. And just look at all that amazing music that's being produced now. There aren't those limitations anymore. The inherent problem of writing your music on your home computer is the lack of feedback. If you're not gigging live, there's no audience reaction to gauge your songwriting. So some musicians will go off on a very, very long stroll up their own asses in a quest for self-indulgent perfectionism. And when this never-ending shit shingle is finally served up to an audience eager to hear something fresh, hot, and awesome, what we get more often than not is a fresh, hot, steaming pile of elephant dung.
That is one big pile of shit.
Restraint seems to be a foreign concept, like the notion of the musician ever paring down their masterpiece to something a bit more palatable to us mere mortals. Somehow, that's beneath them. Format limits were good because they forced the musician to be creative within a set of parameters. So many great songs were crafted within those parameters and have remained memorable for decades. But these days, we don't get that. We get endless percussive riffing and players trying to out-brutal each other. But how many of those guys could ever write something you'd want to listen to more than once? Now, having the right tools is a great start. If headphones are your only option, the Deer VR system is pretty damn impressive. The HD 490s here aren't exactly cheap, but they deliver a level of detail that allows you to work quickly and make mixing decisions no matter what environment you're in. The secret is to get over yourself and create something that's enjoyable to listen to, instead of creating the heavy metal equivalent of Vogon poetry.
In these double wards, with my burgle crunchy.
Fuck!